Welcome to the channel Liturgy of Slaves, March 14th, 1927, St. Landry Parish, Louisiana. A place where pockets of remote land were carved out by the bend of the Mississippi River, where screams traveled nowhere but into the moss-draped cypress trees, and where silence itself became a weapon. That morning, in a wooden shack with no door, just an opening covered by burlap sacking that shifted with the wind, 73-year-old Moses Freeman woke. His skin burned, like ground glass was in his throat. The fever had arrived in the night, sudden and merciless, the way death so often came to the Louisiana lands. But Moses did not yet know that the fever was not the worst thing awaiting him. He did not know that by sunset he would be alone, utterly alone, locked away from every other living soul, left to die in a place the white landowners called the sick house, but which everyone else knew by its true name, the waiting grave. Moses had survived 60 years past slavery, 60 years spent sharecropping on land that would never be his, 60 years watching his children scatter north, searching for something better than the slow suffocation of Louisiana soil. Now in his final hours, the same men who smiled at him on Sundays would condemn him to a death more deliberate than any overseer's whip. Because in St. Landry Parish in 1927, some lives still did not matter, some deaths were still convenient, and some truths were buried so deep that not even the river could wash them clean. What happened to Moses Freeman was no accident. It was not neglect, it was policy, a system so cold and calculated that it had a procedure, a designated location, and a lock for the door. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Stories like this must never be forgotten. Let's continue. In American memory, the year 1927 is fixed as the year of the Great Flood, when the Mississippi River broke through levees and drowned nearly 30,000 square miles of land, when hundreds of thousands lost everything. But beneath that famous disaster, another story unfolded. One that didn't make the newspapers, one that happened in the shadows of cotton fields and along the dirt roads where black families lived as if the Civil War had never ended. St. Landry Parish lay sprawled across central Louisiana like a scar. Its soil was rich and black. Its economy rested on cotton, sugarcane, and the labor of people who owned nothing. Most of the farmland around Mercy Hill, a cluster of sharecropper cabins 4 miles from the nearest town, was controlled by the Beaumont family. Raymond Beaumont ran the operation with his 2 sons, Carl and Louis. They called themselves farmers. They attended First Baptist Church every Sunday. They donated to the parish school fund. But their prosperity was built on a system that kept black families trapped in debt, working land they could never own, living in houses that could barely stand upright. Moses Freeman had worked Beaumont land since 1893. He had been born enslaved in 1854 on a plantation 20 miles south. He remembered the day Union soldiers came through. He remembered his mother weeping with relief. But freedom in Louisiana did not look much different from bondage. Moses sharecropped tobacco first, then cotton. He married a woman named Celia, who died giving birth to their 4th child. He raised those children alone. By 1927, they were all gone. 2 daughters in Chicago, 1 son in Detroit, and 1 son in the parish cemetery, killed in a logging accident in 1919. Moses was old now. His hands were twisted with arthritis, his back permanently bent from decades of stooping in the fields. He could no longer work as he once did, but he had nowhere else to go. The Beaumonts let him stay in a cabin near the southern edge of their property. They gave him occasional work. Mostly they ignored him until the fever came. The sickness began in late February. A young woman named Anna Price collapsed in the fields. She was 26 strong, a mother of 3. By the next morning her skin was burning, her eyes rolled back, she could not speak. The Beaumonts sent for Doc Harlon, the white physician who served the parish. He came, looked at Anna for less than 5 minutes and shook his head. "Typhoid," he said. "Maybe malaria. Hard to say, keep her away from the others." Doc Harlon offered no medicine, suggested no hospital. He simply left. Anna's husband, Thomas, carried her back to their cabin and tried to cool her with wet rags. She died 3 days later. The Beaumonts buried her quickly in the colored section of the parish cemetery. No service, no headstone. Just a wooden cross that would rot within a year. Then others fell sick. An older man named Samuel. 2 teenagers, a brother and sister, a woman in her 40s who worked in the Beaumont kitchen. The fever moved through the cabins like something alive, like something hunting. People whispered. They wondered if it was the water. The well near the cabins was old and poorly maintained. Or perhaps it was the food. The salt pork the Beaumonts distributed was often spoiled. Or maybe it was just God's punishment for sins nobody could name. Raymond Beaumont called a meeting. He gathered the heads of the black families who worked his land. About 15 men and women stood in the dirt yard behind the main house. Carl and Louis Beaumont stood beside their father, arms crossed. Raymond spoke in a voice that sounded reasonable, almost kind. "We have a situation," he said. "People are getting sick, dying, some of them. I don't know what this is. Doc Harlon doesn't know either, but it's spreading and we can't have that. Can't have the whole operation shut down because folks are dropping like flies." Nobody spoke. They knew better. "So here's what we're going to do," Raymond continued. "Anybody who shows signs of fever, we're moving them out. There's an old tobacco barn on the east side of the property. We're going to fix it up, make it comfortable. Anybody sick goes there. That way the healthy folks stay healthy, the sick folks get rest. Everybody wins." One of the men, a sharecropper named Elijah, spoke up carefully. "Mr. Beaumont, sir, who's going to take care of the sick folks? They're going to need water, food, somebody to look after them." Raymond smiled. "We'll make sure they have what they need. Don't you worry about that." But Elijah did worry. So did everyone else, because they understood what Raymond Beaumont was truly saying. The sick would be removed, isolated, and whatever happened afterward would happen out of sight. Moses Freeman heard about the plan from his neighbor, a woman named Ruth, who sometimes brought him cornbread. She stood outside his cabin, her face tight with fear. "They're going to put sick folks in that old barn," she said. "Lock them in, leave them there." Moses sat on the edge of his cot, trying to make sense of it. Why would they do that? Because they don't want us spreading sickness, and because they don't care if we die, long as it happens where nobody can see. A chill went through Moses that had nothing to do with the weather. He had lived long enough to know that white folks in Louisiana could do anything they wanted to black folks. The law didn't protect you. The church didn't protect you. If you were old, sick, or weak, you were just a problem waiting to be solved. That night, Moses could not sleep. He thought about his children, wondered if he should try to write them, but he had no paper, no way to mail a letter even if he did. He thought about running, but where? He was 73 years old. He could barely walk a mile without his knees giving out. He thought about praying, but the words wouldn't come. God had been silent for a long time. The fever found Moses 3 days later. He woke with his head pounding, his vision blurred. He tried to stand and collapsed back onto the cot. Ruth came by in the afternoon and saw him shaking under his thin blanket. "Oh, Moses," she whispered. "Oh, no." She brought him water, tried to get him to eat, but Moses couldn't keep anything down. By evening, his skin was burning, his lips cracked and bleeding. Ruth knew what came next. She sat with him as long as she dared. Then she left because staying too long meant risking her own life. The Beaumonts came the next morning, Carl and Louis, along with 2 black men they'd hired to do the work. They stood in the doorway of Moses's cabin, staring down at him. "He's burning up," Carl said. Louis nodded. "Get him to the barn." Moses tried to speak, tried to say he just needed rest, just a few days, but his voice came out as a croak. The 2 men lifted him, one on each side, and carried him out into the daylight. Moses's eyes couldn't adjust. Everything was too bright, too loud. The world spun. They carried him across a field. through a line of trees, and into a clearing where an old tobacco barn stood. The structure was barely standing, the roof sagged, the walls were gray and splintered, but someone had recently nailed boards across the windows. Someone had installed a heavy lock on the door. Inside, the barn was dim and stifling. The air smelled of rot and old smoke. 3 other people were already there. Moses couldn't see their faces clearly, just shapes, bodies lying on the dirt floor. One of them was moaning, another was completely still. The men lowered Moses onto a patch of ground near the wall. Someone had left a bucket of water, a tin cup, a blanket that looked like it had been used to wrap a dead animal. Carl Beaumont stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. "You'll be all right," he said. "Just rest. We'll check on you." Then he walked out. The door swung shut. Moses heard the lock click into place. The barn went dark. Moses lay there, trying to understand what had just happened. His mind was slow. The fever made everything feel distant, unreal. He listened to the sounds around him. The moaning, the breathing, the creak of the building settling. He tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't obey. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't work right anymore. The heat inside the barn was suffocating. Moses's throat was so dry he couldn't swallow. He reached for the bucket of water. His hand trembled. He managed to grip the tin cup and dip it into the bucket. The water was warm, tasted like metal, but he drank it anyway. One of the other people in the barn spoke, a man's voice, weak and raspy. "They ain't coming back," the voice said. Moses turned his head toward the sound. "What? They ain't coming back? They brought us here to die." Moses wanted to argue, wanted to say that couldn't be true, but deep down he knew. He had known the moment they locked the door. "How long you been here?" Moses asked. 3 days, maybe 4, hard to tell. They brought food once, first day, ain't seen nobody since. Moses closed his eyes. The fever was getting worse. His thoughts scattered like birds. He saw his mother's face. Saw Celia on their wedding day, saw his children as babies. He wondered if he would die here, wondered if anyone would even know. The man spoke again. "My name's Samuel. I used to work the North Fields. Moses, South Fields. We was neighbors then." They didn't speak again for a long time. Talking took too much strength. Moses drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time he woke, the barn was darker, hotter. The moaning had stopped. He didn't know if that meant the person had gotten better or had died. He suspected the latter. On the 2nd day, or maybe the 3rd, Moses had lost count. He heard footsteps outside. Hope surged through him. Someone was coming. Someone would help. He tried to call out, but his voice was gone. The footsteps stopped near the door. Moses heard voices, low, muffled. "How many in there?" That was Carl Beaumont. 4. A different voice. "One of the hired men. Any of them dead yet?" "Can't tell from out here." "Well, don't open it. We'll check in a few more days." The footsteps walked away. Something broke inside Moses, not his body, something deeper. The part of him that still believed people had decency, that believed in mercy, in God, in anything. He turned his head and looked at Samuel. The older man was lying on his side, staring at nothing. His chest barely moved. "Samuel," Moses whispered, "you still here?" Samuel didn't answer. Moses reached out, touched Samuel's arm. The skin was cold. Samuel was dead. Moses pulled his hand back and stared at the body. This was how it would end. Alone in a barn, surrounded by corpses, locked away like an animal. He thought about his life, wondered what it had all been for. He had worked every day since he was old enough to walk. He had obeyed, he had survived, and this was his reward. The 3rd person in the barn died that night. Moses heard the breathing stop, heard the silence that followed. Now it was just him and the bodies. He should have been terrified, should have been screaming, but he felt nothing. Just a deep, heavy exhaustion. He tried to pray, tried to remember the words his mother had taught him. Our Father, who art in heaven. But he couldn't finish. The words felt empty. If God was listening, he wasn't answering. He never had. Moses thought about escape, thought about trying to break through the walls, but he could barely lift his head. The fever had taken everything. He was a shell, a body waiting to stop. Days blurred together, the heat became unbearable. Moses's skin cracked, his lips bled, he drank the last of the water. Then there was nothing. He lay on the dirt floor and waited for death. It felt like the only mercy left, but something strange happened. On what Moses thought was the 5th or 6th day, the fever broke. Not completely, but enough that he could think clearly, enough that he could sit up. He looked around the barn. 2 bodies, flies buzzing. The smell was overwhelming, but Moses was alive. He crawled to the door and pushed against it. The lock held. He pushed harder. Nothing. He searched the barn for anything he could use, a tool, a piece of metal. But there was nothing, just dirt and death. Moses sat with his back against the wall and tried to understand why he was still breathing. Why him? Why not Samuel? Why not the others? Was it luck? Was it God? Or was it just cruelty, keeping him alive long enough to suffer more? He heard voices outside again. This time they were closer. He recognized Ruth's voice. "You can't keep them locked in there," she was saying. "It ain't right. You need to mind your business." That was Louis Beaumont. "Moses Freeman is in there. He's an old man. He don't deserve this. He's sick. We're protecting the rest of you. You're killing him." There was a pause. Then Louis spoke again, his voice colder. "You keep talking like that, Ruth, and you'll end up in there with him. Now get back to work." Moses heard Ruth's footsteps walking away. He wanted to call out to her, to let her know he was alive, but his voice wouldn't come. And even if it did, what good would it do? They wouldn't let him out. They had made their decision. Moses leaned his head back and stared at the cracks in the roof. Thin lines of light came through. He watched the dust move in the beams. Thought about how strange it was that something so small could be beautiful, that even here in this place of death there was light. He didn't know how much longer he would last, but he decided something in that moment. If he was going to die here, he would die remembering. He would remember his mother's voice, his wife's laugh, his children's faces. He would remember every sunrise he had ever seen, every meal he had ever shared, every song he had ever heard. Because if he could hold on to those things, then the Beaumonts couldn't take everything. They could lock him in a barn. They could let him starve, but they couldn't erase his life. They couldn't make him nothing. Moses Freeman closed his eyes and began to remember. The memory that came to Moses first was water, clean water, cold water from the spring near his mother's cabin when he was a boy, before the war ended, before freedom came. He remembered cupping his small hands and drinking until his stomach hurt. Remembered his mother washing his face with a rag she dipped in that same spring. Her hands had been gentle. Her voice had been soft when she sang to him. Songs he didn't understand then. Songs about rivers and crossings and a home he'd never seen. Moses held on to that memory like a rope, like something that could pull him back from wherever the fever wanted to take him. His body was failing. He knew that. His heartbeat felt irregular, weak. His breathing came in shallow gasps. But his mind was clearing, getting sharper, as if his body was shutting down so his mind could burn brighter one last time. He thought about Celia, the way she had looked at him the first time they met. It was 1875. He was 21. She was 19. They met at a church gathering in Oplausas. She wore a yellow dress that someone had given her. It was too big. She had tied it with rope to make it fit. But to Moses, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They married 3 months later, had 4 children in 6 years. She died in 1881, bleeding out after the last birth. The baby lived 2 days. Moses had blamed himself, blamed God, blamed the poverty that meant no doctor would come, no hospital would take her. She died on a cornshuck mattress in a cabin with gaps in the walls, died holding his hand. Her last words were, "Take care of them," and he had. For 46 years he had kept that promise. Now, lying in the barn, Moses wondered if his children even knew where he was. He hadn't written in months, couldn't afford the stamps. His daughter Clara had sent money at Christmas. $5. He'd spent it on flour and coffee. He should have saved it, should have used it to leave, to buy a bus ticket north. But he hadn't believed he would need to run, hadn't believed the Beaumonts would do this, A sound pulled Moses from his thoughts. Scratching, something was scratching at the wall of the barn. He turned his head slowly, saw a gap in the boards near the floor. Something dark moved in the opening, a rat. Moses watched it squeeze through and scurry across the dirt. It stopped near Samuel's body, started to chew. Moses looked away. He didn't have the strength to be disgusted anymore. He didn't have the strength to care. The rat was just trying to survive, just like him, just like everyone. Time became meaningless. Moses drifted between sleep and waking, between memory and delirium. He saw his mother again, saw her standing in the doorway of the barn, outlined in light. She was young, beautiful. She smiled at him. "Come on, baby," she said. "Time to come home." Moses tried to stand, tried to walk toward her, but his legs wouldn't move. His mother's smile faded. She shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "You got to hold on a little longer." Then she was gone. Moses blinked. The barn was dark again, empty again, just him and the bodies and the rats. On what Moses believed was the seventh day, the door opened. Light flooded in. Moses squinted against it. Couldn't see who was standing there. Couldn't make out faces. "Just shapes, Jesus Christ," a voice said. "Carl Beaumont, the smell, they all dead." Another voice. "Lewis, can't tell, check." Footsteps came closer. Moses tried to speak, tried to say he was alive. But only a thin whisper came out. A shadow fell over him. Someone kicked his leg, not hard, just testing. "This one's still breathing," the voice said. "One of the hired men." "Well, hell," Carl said. "How's he still alive?" "Don't know. The other two been dead a while." There was a pause. Moses heard them talking quietly. Couldn't make out the words. Then Carl spoke louder. "All right, get him out of there. Take him back to his cabin, but keep him away from the others. If he's still sick, we don't need it spreading again." Moses felt hands grip him under his arms. Felt himself being lifted. The world spun. His vision went black. When it cleared, he was outside. The sun was blinding. The air was cool and fresh, and so clean it made him want to weep. They carried him across the field, back through the trees, back to his cabin. They dropped him on his cot, not gently. Moses's head hit the wooden frame. Pain shot through his skull, but he didn't care. He was out, he was free, he was breathing air that didn't smell like death. "Don't go wandering off," Carl said from the doorway. "You're still under watch. Anybody comes near you, we'll put you right back in that barn, understand?" Moses managed to nod. Carl left. Moses lay there, staring at the ceiling of his cabin, at the gaps in the roof where he could see sky. Real sky, not the dim light through cracks in a barn. He started to cry, silent tears that ran down his temples and into his hair. He couldn't stop them, didn't try. Ruth came that night. She crept to his cabin after dark, carrying a pot of soup. She set it down beside his cot and knelt next to him. "Moses," she whispered. "Moses, can you hear me?" He opened his eyes, saw her face, nodded. "Thank God," she said. "Thank God you made it." "The others," Moses said. His voice was barely there. "Samuel, the others." Ruth's face went hard. "They're dead. The Beaumonts buried them yesterday. No service, no nothing. Just put them in the ground like dogs." Moses closed his eyes, felt a rage building in his chest, a rage so deep it hurt worse than the fever. "Why? Because they could." Ruth said, "Because we don't matter to them. Never did, never will." She helped him sit up, spooned soup into his mouth. It was thin, mostly broth with a few pieces of potato, but it was warm, it was food. Moses's stomach cramped. He couldn't eat much, but he tried. "You got to get out of here," Ruth said. "Soon as you're strong enough, you got to leave." "Where would I go?" "North to your children, anywhere but here." Moses shook his head. "I'm too old, too weak. I'd never make it." "Then you'll die here, and next time they won't let you out of that barn." Her words sat heavy in the room. Moses knew she was right, knew that the Beaumonts had let him live by accident, by miscalculation. It wouldn't happen again. If he got sick again, or if anyone else got sick, and they thought he was a risk, they'd lock him away for good. And this time they'd make sure. Ruth left before dawn. Moses lay awake, thinking about what she'd said. Thinking about Chicago, about Clara. His daughter had a good job there. worked as a maid for a wealthy family, made decent money, sent some home when she could. She had written once about how different the city was, how black folks could walk down the street without stepping off the sidewalk for white folks, how there were jobs opportunities, how she was saving money to buy a house. Moses had never believed those letters. They sounded like fairy tales, like something too good to be true. But now, lying in his cabin, feeling his body slowly coming back from the edge of death, he wondered if maybe Clara had been telling the truth, wondered if maybe there was a place in this country where he could be something other than a problem to be solved. The next few days were hard. Moses's body was recovering, but slowly. He could sit up, could eat a little, but walking more than a few steps left him dizzy and gasping. Ruth came every night with food, sometimes just cornbread, sometimes beans, once a piece of salt pork she'd stolen from the Beaumont kitchen. "You're taking too much risk," Moses told her. "Somebody's got to," she said. "Somebody's got to care." On the 10th day after Moses had been released from the barn, something changed. Ruth came during daylight. That was unusual, dangerous. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were wide. "Moses," she said, "Moses, you got to listen. There's talk. Carl Beaumont is telling people you're still sick, that you're dangerous. He's saying you should go back in the barn." Moses felt his stomach drop. "But I'm not sick. The fever's gone. It don't matter. They want you gone. They're worried you'll talk. Worried you'll tell people what they did." "Who would I tell? Who would believe me?" Ruth grabbed his arm. "That's not the point. They don't want to take the chance. You got to leave tonight. Right now." Moses stared at her. His mind was racing. Leave? How? He could barely walk. Had no money, no food, no plan. "I can't," he said. "You have to." "Ruth, I'm 73 years old. I got nothing. Where am I supposed to go?" She reached into her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is your daughter's address, Clara in Chicago. I got it from the letter you showed me last year. You remember?" Moses took the paper. His hands were shaking. "How am I supposed to get to Chicago?" "There's a colored man named Jackson who runs a truck route, delivers produce to Baton Rouge. He leaves tomorrow morning. I already talked to him. He'll take you as far as Baton Rouge. From there, you can catch a train north." "I don't have money for a train." Ruth reached into her apron again, pulled out a small cloth bundle, handed it to him. Moses unwrapped it. Inside were coins, crumpled bills, maybe $8 total. "This is from everyone," Ruth said. "Everyone in the cabins. We all pitched in. It ain't much, but it might be enough." Moses stared at the money, felt tears burning his eyes again. "I can't take this. You can and you will, because if you stay here you'll die and we'll have to watch it happen, and we can't. We just can't." Moses looked at her, saw the desperation in her face, the fear, the love. These people had nothing, less than nothing, and they were giving him everything they had. "Thank you," he whispered. Ruth nodded, stood up. "Jackson's truck leaves from the crossroads at dawn. Be there. Don't bring nothing you don't need. Just go." She left. Moses sat alone in his cabin, holding the money, holding the paper with Clara's address. He looked around at the place he had lived for decades. At the cot, the wooden crate he used as a table, the tin cup, the blanket. This was his whole life. This was everything he owned, and he was about to walk away from it. But Ruth was right. If he stayed, the Beaumonts would kill him. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. They had locked him in a barn to die once. They would do it again. And next time there would be no escape, no miracle, no second chance. Moses spent the rest of the day resting, conserving his strength. As the sun set, he ate the last of the food Ruth had brought, drank as much water as he could hold. When darkness came, he lay down and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was too loud, too full of fear and memory and hope. Just before dawn, Moses stood up. His legs trembled. His head swam, but he stayed upright. He folded the blanket and left it on the cot. Took the tin cup and left it on the crate. Took nothing else. He walked to the door of the cabin and looked back one last time. Then he stepped outside. The air was cold. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east. Moses walked slowly, carefully toward the crossroads. Every step hurt. Every breath was an effort, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet, not like this. He reached the crossroads just as the first light touched the horizon. A truck was already there. An old Ford, rusted and dented. A black man sat in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. He looked at Moses and nodded. "You Moses Freeman?" the man asked. "Yes, sir. I'm Jackson. Ruth told me about you. You ready?" Moses nodded. Jackson got out and helped him into the truck bed. There were crates of vegetables, sacks of potatoes. Moses sat between them, leaning against the side of the truck. Jackson covered him with a tarp. "Stay quiet," Jackson said. "We got to pass through town. White folks see an old colored man in my truck. They'll ask questions I don't want to answer." Moses pulled the tarp over his head. The truck started. The engine coughed and rattled. Then they were moving. Moses felt every bump in the road, every pothole. His body ached, but he didn't care. He was leaving, he was escaping, he was free. The drive took hours. Moses dozed under the tarp. Woke when the truck hit rough patches, dozed again. He heard Jackson stop once, heard voices, white voices. His heart pounded, but the voices faded. The truck moved on. When the tarp was finally pulled back, Moses blinked against the light. They were in a city, buildings, paved streets, more people than Moses had ever seen in one place, Baton Rouge. Jackson said, "Train station's 2 blocks that way. You got enough money for a ticket?" Moses showed him the bundle. Jackson counted it quickly. "It's tight, but you might make it. Ask for a colored car ticket to Chicago. Don't let them cheat you, and don't talk to nobody you don't have to." Moses climbed out of the truck. His legs nearly gave out. Jackson steadied him. "You sure you can make it?" Jackson asked. "I have to," Moses said. Jackson nodded, handed him a biscuit wrapped in paper for the road. Then he got back in the truck and drove away. Moses stood on the sidewalk, holding the biscuit, holding the money, holding Clara's address. People walked past him. Nobody looked at him. He was invisible, just another old black man in a city full of them. Moses walked toward the train station. It took him 20 minutes to cover 2 blocks. His chest was tight, his vision blurred, but he kept moving. When he reached the station, he saw the signs, * whites only, colored waiting room, * he followed the arrows to a side entrance. A small room with wooden benches, a window with bars. He approached the window. A white man sat behind it, reading a newspaper. "Help you?" the man said without looking up. "Ticket to Chicago." Moses said, "Colored car." The man finally looked at him, looked him up and down. "That'll be $7.50. Moses counted out the money. His hands shook. He had exactly $7.63. He pushed the bills and coins through the slot. The man counted it, wrote out a ticket, slid it back through. "Train leaves in an hour, track 3. Colored cars are in the back." Moses took the ticket, found a bench, and sat down. His whole body was trembling. He had done it. He had bought a ticket. He was going to Chicago, going to see Clara, going to leave Louisiana behind forever. The hour passed slowly. Moses watched people come and go, watched families reunite, watched men in suits carry briefcases, watched women in fine dresses. Nobody looked at him. He was still invisible. When the announcement came, Moses stood and walked to the platform. The train was massive, black and gleaming. It hissed steam. Moses walked to the back, to the colored cars. They were older, more worn, but they were cars on a train going north. That was enough. He climbed aboard, found a seat by a window, sat down. The seat was hard. The car was crowded, but Moses didn't care. He pressed his face against the window and watched the platform. Watched Baton Rouge, watched Louisiana. The train whistle blew, the engine roared, and then they were moving. Slowly at first, then faster. The buildings blurred, the trees blurred. Everything Moses had ever known disappeared behind him. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, felt the rhythm of the train, felt himself moving forward. Felt himself leaving the barn and the fever and the Beaumonts and the fear. Felt himself becoming something new. Something he hadn't been in 60 years, free. Moses Freeman arrived in Chicago on March 23, 1927. Clara met him at Union Station. She didn't recognize him at first. He had lost so much weight, looked so old. But when he said her name, she knew. She wrapped her arms around him and cried into his shoulder. "I thought you were dead," she said. "I thought I'd never see you again." Moses held her, felt her warmth, her life, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself believe he would survive. He lived with Clara for 3 more years, died peacefully in his sleep in 1930. He was 76. He never spoke about the barn, never told Clara what the Beaumonts had done. Some things were too dark to carry into the light. Some things were better left buried. But sometimes, late at night, Clara would hear him crying, would hear him whispering names. Samuel, Anna, Ruth, the ones who didn't make it, the ones who died in silence while the world looked away. The tobacco barn in St. Landry Parish stood for another 40 years. It was torn down in 1967. Nobody marked the spot. Nobody remembered what happened there. The Beaumont family sold the land in 1952, moved to Texas. The sharecropper cabins rotted and collapsed. The fields grew wild. Today, if you drive through St. Landry Parish, you won't find any trace of Mercy Hill. Won't find any record of Moses Freeman or the people who died in that barn. History erased them, buried them the same way the Beaumonts did. But their names were real, their lives were real, their deaths were real. And somewhere in Chicago, in a cemetery on the south side, there's a simple headstone that reads, *** Moses Freeman, 1008, 154, 1930, beloved father, he made it home, ***. That's all it says. But it's enough, because Moses did make it home, not to heaven, not to some promised land, just to a place where he could die with dignity, where he could close his eyes surrounded by love instead of locked behind a door. And maybe that's all freedom ever was. Not the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, the right to decide how your story ends. Moses chose to run, chose to live, chose to remember, and in remembering, he made sure that the people who died in that barn were not forgotten, that their silence was broken, that their names were spoken, even if only in whispers, even if only in the dark, even if only by one old man who refused to let the world erase him.